Welcome to episode 9 of Media Conversations with Malik Cooper. I am your host, Malik Cooper, joined here today by former ESPN producer and senior producer at the Sports Business Journal, Mr. Acie Wyatt. I'll let make that the last time. But good afternoon, Acie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on the show. First, I wanted to express once again how excited I am to have you here because it is my personal dream to become a producer one day. And you've been a producer at the worldwide leader in sports, ESPN. So I wanted to ask you what your experience there was like producing studio shows at the top level that everyone is trying to get to, essentially.
Well, first, I got to say, you're a producer now. You know, it's not something you're striving to do. Everybody has their own talents, and you putting this on right now, you're already a producer, and you know, you're 20 years old, so you have a long runway in front of you. So it's just awesome that you're doing this right now. So you should definitely take pride in that. You know, as far as working at ESPN, you know, it's like they'll tell you like they no longer go by the worldwide leader, but they're still the worldwide leader.
Right.
It's just a lot of fun just to work there. You know, it's so fun. I actually worked there twice. You know, I had an in-between where I left for 3 years and then came back to the company. But, you know, it's definitely one of those places where, you know, I started there right out of college and it felt like graduate school. Now, I do have a master's degree, so I did in turn go to graduate school later. But yes. It felt like, you know, college for me was, you know, I got to play football for 4 more years. I went to Hampton and played football there. But it was mainly a chance to kind of, you know, make lifelong friends. The most important thing I got out of college is where I met my wife. That's number one. And then number two is it's where I met the person that hired me to work at ESPN. And so, you know, just working at ESPN, I got there and, you know, eventually worked my way into the NFL project. So I was working on Sunday Countdown and what's now called NFL Live, what's called NFL Tonight at the time. So those were really fun. And, you know, just being around a bunch of not necessarily like-minded, like 100% like-minded, but like still that like love of sports, to the point where, you know, you candidly, like my off days when I first got out of college and I was working up there were Tuesday, Wednesday, right? So, you know, and then my shift was 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. because I was mainly doing West Coast baseball at that time. No, it's fine. So you find other people that have similar schedules, you know, they still have that passion and love of sports. And, you know, just generally for the most part, I'd say at least at the early level, the level that I was at, they hire good people first. And that happen to be really talented, you know, in one area or multiple areas. And so you kind of find connections with people and then you know, you make lifelong friends that, you know, you just kind of go from there. So, but, you know, as far as producing there, it's also like that's kind of the foundation is that you have these people that are really passionate. So even if you disagree with someone on something, you know, for instance, the Kobe versus LeBron versus Michael Jordan, like who's the greatest player of all time? You know, one probably depends on how old you are. You know, I am on the other side of 40, so I'm going to say Jordan, but I do appreciate
what my answer is.
Also with LeBron though, like I'm a Wizards fan. Like I root for all the DC teams.
Okay.
When LeBron was with the Cavs the first time, he destroyed my Wizards. So I have a little bit of a grudge there. So I can't just, Gilbert Arenas, Antoine Jameson, and Caron Butler. Like that was kind of the core, you know, the big three that there were, but we didn't have LeBron. So, you know, but so that's kind of there. It's because I saw him actually, you know, dash dreams of, you know, moving on in the playoffs. So that's why I kind of give it to Jordan because that's, you know, my formative years. He was the best player at that time. He's the best player of all time. So of course he's the best player at that time. But just being at ESPN and being around people that you can kind of debate with, it made you better, you know, and it was nothing personal because it's just sports. I mean, you know, it's not like we're, you know, curing cancer or anything like that. You know, we're just talking sports. So like you could have a disagreement, but like having those disagreements and also finding people that kind of thought similar to you, it made you better because it also gave you a way of kind of thinking differently. Like if you kind of think of someone else, oh, I hadn't thought about that, you know, and it kind of helps form your opinions, but also kind of helps form content as well.
Something you said struck me because I've met a lot of people over the course of my time making connections that went to ESPN straight out of college like you did, but a lot of them didn't get the experience that you had. Obviously, you stayed there for an extended period of time after you first got there. They sort of leave and go to places like where you work now at the Sports Business Journal and just try and find other opportunities. So what was it about your time starting there as an associate producer that made you want to stay?
It was what I was doing. You know, I root for all the DC teams because I'm from Virginia, right? So like we have 4 seasons, but it's a little warmer than Connecticut, right? So that seems to kind of get a lot of people in a headspace where they're like, I can't do this, because, you know, when you come out and it's May and there's still snow on the ground, sometimes, you know, it can kind of wear on you. But for me, it was, you know, being in the NFL project, like I went to 3 Super Bowls, you know, so
really
that kind of helps you kind of stick around, because you're like, one, it's a lot of work, but it's fulfilling work. And so, you know, if you're kind of rewarded at the end of the season by being able to go to, you know, the biggest sporting event in the country, or one of the biggest events in the country, you know, it kind of makes it worth it. But also like the competitive nature of it, you know, not necessarily competing against others, but kind of competing against what you did previously and trying to get better in that regard as well. And I think, you know, being a former student athlete, like that's kind of in me, but that was in a lot of people. And so it kind of brought out the best in all of us. So it made for and if that's something that you enjoy, if you enjoy getting better each day, or sometimes even minute by minute, then it makes it easier to kind of stick around, because you're not necessarily showing up because the work is fun all the time, but you're showing up because you're constantly getting better.
Talked about working on NFL projects. You've worked for NFL Primetime, so can you tell me, how close did you get to Chris Berman?
When I left ESPN the first time, Chris Berman was one of my references for my resume.
Oh my God.
So
the Swami. You're not serious.
Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, like, you know, he's just like, once you kind of work with him, like, he really appreciates your hard work. And so, you know, it's not like I could text him right now, you know, like, hey, Swam, what's going on? But, you know, if we saw each other in a common place, we're like, hey, you know, and plus, like, his giving people nicknames didn't extend only to athletes that he talked about on camera. So, you know, my name is Acie, right? And so he would call me Acie Doocy or Acie DC all the time, you know? And so it's just kind of one of those things that, like, made him endearing to people that were around him, because it definitely made you feel like he appreciated what you do and what you did for the show. And, you know, to that extent, what you did for him.
Any other major personalities that would impress people who have never worked for ESPN before? Because I've also heard, once again, just thinking about all the people I've talked to, that once you work with these people, kind of like you said, you gain a mutual respect for each other, and it's a work relationship, and it's not just like, oh, that's Chris Berman, that's Stephen A, that's Max, things of that nature. But who else did you work with?
Well, I mean, there's to that point, there's a certain level of kind of, you know, you're not just gonna on day one be like, hey, Chris, how's it going, right? You know you are, but once you kind of get past that level, that layer, then you're good to go. You know, one of the other people that I worked with some was Stuart Scott. And so, you know, just a good guy. But like, the fun thing about him is that every now and then we'd have like these pickup football games just randomly around the city of Bristol. Yeah. And, you know, one day this is when I was a production assistant, so before I was an AP, you know, we were just talking about, oh yeah, hey, are we still on for playing on Thursday? And Stu's like, what are you guys playing? We were like, you know, we're just doing pickup football. He's like, can I come? And we're like, sure. This is where it's going to be. If you show up, you show up. Sure enough, you know, he showed up.
He was ready.
He was a lot more physical than what we were playing, but you know, it was all in good fun.
Wow.
You know, it's like, it was just kind of like one of those stories like you always kind of have. It's like, yeah, you know, I was, and you know, he was super athletic, right? And super fit, and like we weren't. So, you know, like he'd do just kind of, you know, athletic moves at the line. Like if he was a wide receiver and be like, oh, well, I guess he's scoring a touchdown. So, and it wasn't like we let him score. he just did. So, but it was just a lot of fun. So, you know, it wasn't just, hey, here's what we call a shot sheet, which if you cut a highlight for SportsCenter, it tells every shot that's in the highlight. And it was never just, hey, here's your shot sheet, you know, thanks. It was, you know, you actually got a chance to kind of talk to him in downtimes, and, you know, just a good down to earth guy. But then, you know, it's funny, maybe a little, I won't say that. One of the other guys that, you know, I've kind of kept in contact with, you know, throughout my time at ESPN and other places, is Stan Verett.
Yes.
Who's anchoring the West Coast, the Los Angeles Sports Center. But when I was in college, I played at Hampton down in southeastern Virginia, and Stan was on the radio in the Hampton Roads area. And so, you know, when I met Stan, when we were both at ESPN when I was there the first time, he heard my name, and, you know, it's pretty uncommon. You know, it's like my dad's name is the same, but other than that, I think there's one other guy in the world that has this name. But he was like, hey, did you play at Hampton? And so we just I was like, how do you know me? You're a guy that's on SportsCenter. Why would you know my name just randomly? But he did, because, you know, he also did some local broadcasting there too. So we actually did cross paths when I was in when I was in college. But, you know, now we just kind of laugh about it, especially because he's a Howard guy. So there's allegedly a rivalry there. I don't see it as one because, you know, we're Hampton. We have no rivals. But and that's just kind of a thing for us Hamptonians.
You talked about just a little bit about handing your talent the shot sheet. I was wondering just how many different forms and papers do the talent have in front of them at ESPN, because I introduced, when I go on my job shadows and things of that nature, what I've been most familiarized with is a rundown. Are there both things handed to the talent and then maybe something else?
So just for talent, right? So their rundown might be printed out. It might be on their laptop. You know, it just depends on what their setup is. Some people like paper in their hands, but because the highlights are usually being done in relatively real time, so you kind of have to write everything out or at least print it out to them. So they'll have the shot sheet, they'll have the rundown, but then they'll have, you know, multiple people in their ear, you know, whether it's the producer or it's the other anchor or it's the director or not just there is the reporter that they're going to talk to out in the field, you know, to kind of do a back and forth interview. So it's not just what's in front of them, it's what's in their ear as well. And then, you know, they could have something else that's in the teleprompter. And then outside of the teleprompter, they might have, you know, a monitor underneath the teleprompter that kind of shows like either this is what's being output to the world, or, you know, this is, you know, the reporter that's coming up or something like that. And then you won't see this unless they like use the overhead camera, which they rarely use because it actually exposes some people's bald spots, but I don't think they are ready. You know, the world's not ready for them to see, you know, what's going on up here. They have these little monitors in the desk as well.
Really?
And so that kind of shows them like that's usually the program monitor, which has like what's being outputted out. So, you know, as you're kind of reading your shot sheet over here, you can see the monitor here, and you can kind of make sure that you are staying on track with what you're talking about. Because a lot of times when they're getting the shot sheet, they don't know what's in the highlight. And so they're depending on that shot sheet in order to make sure that they're conveying out what the highlight is.
Right, exactly. That seems like a bit of an overload. Like you said, the teleprompter, shot sheet, rundown, and people in your ear. So knowing the talent has to deal with all of those things at once, with you as the producer, how much do you want to put your imprint on the show as far as, oh, we need to tell them this, put this into the show, run this graphic and things of that nature live, to where you don't want to, you know, confuse the talent? Just make it all streamlined as possible for the audience. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what you're doing as a producer. You're helping to keep everything organized. And so a lot of times you're not going to be in your talent's ear unless you're kind of breaking news to them. That's usually where you're going to be like, hey, I need you to say this, and they're sometimes regarded, but that's rare. That's relatively rare, right. Especially in sports. I mean, in news, it's probably a lot more common because there's, usually a little less breaking news in sports. But you're just trying to make sure that, and every person's different, every talent's different. So you kind of have to weigh them, what they like doing versus, what another person might like to do. Ideally, what you'd like is you have a two anchor ship. So while one anchor is talking, you can talk to the other one. But sometimes you just got to be like, hey, I'm killing this highlight. And you try to figure out, like, this is the point I need to tell them. Hey, I'm killing this highlight. We're going straight to this. And then you're kind of looking in the control room, you're looking at the monitor to make sure they have acknowledged what you have said. If not, then you just have to repeat it. And then, they're like, hey, I don't like you being in my ear. I'm like, I get that. I need this I needed the information to you. So that's why that was the way it was. And you kind of just move on. I have been fortunate that, it's not like I've worked with talent that have held grudges. It's like, it's usually really? Like in the moment of the show, this is what it needed to be. But for the most part, it's just,
it's nothing personal.
It's nothing personal. It's about getting out the best product you can. So as long as everybody's on the same page about that, then you usually have pretty good shows.
How has sports television changed for you with the rise of emphasis, mostly mandated by the consumer, that debate shows are at the forefront now, whereas before the emphasis on the information being put out was probably more journalistic in nature, as far as just reporting what happened in the game versus it being all opinion versus opinion?
Well, I've been fortunate enough, I guess that's the best way of putting it, that I haven't had to do a debate show. What we do end up doing is, sports news specific show that helps provide analysis.
Yes.
And so, it's a little different than who won, who lost. It's like, well, why did this happen? And then just kind of go from there. But, like the debate shows, they all have their place. And, if that's what people enjoy, then, there are plenty of those shows out there. But, most of the shows that I tried to put together were shows that kind of helped inform an opinion rather than give an opinion as information. And so, I was fortunate enough to do that for most of my career, and that's still kind of what some of the content that we're putting out here at Sports Business Journal, because we're not an over-the-air product, so we're able to kind of fine-tune what we want to put out there as well. But it's honestly, I think the push is more to kind of give out bursts of information in smaller chunks, with the rise of social media, just because, like, my career started in the year 2000, and, you think of all the stuff that's changed in the last 22 years. That's probably the bigger one than debate shows, just because, now you can kind of get your information out to, you can either tailor it to a specific audience, or you can kind of put it out for a wider audience, but you kind of have options. And, as where, when I was at ESPN before, and even my in-between at what is now NBC Sports Washington, you kind of put stuff out there and didn't really get a lot of feedback, like, from the market, because you're like, well, I don't know who watched necessarily. But now that you have social media, you can kind of engage with people and really kind of tailor to, what they're engaging in.
What prompted your move at the start of 2019 to the Sports Business Journal?
It was just another opportunity. It's a well-respected company. And so, I was fortunate enough that I got to work at ESPN twice, but it was just kind of like, I saw it as another challenge to do something great. It's like, you can kind of fall back a little bit, like working at ESPN. You're like, well, we're the best and people are going to watch, so you can kind of just be like, well, that's it. But to be able to kind of build here, which is what we're doing, has definitely been rewarding, because it's now now it's funny. Now I cover ESPN,
Really?
and so like I get to talk to some of the executives that I probably wouldn't have been able to talk to had I still been at ESPN. And so to be able to kind of pick their brains is pretty rewarding for what we're building here. But now I could talk to someone at ESPN, I could talk to someone at CBS Sports or NBC Sports or Fox Sports, so now it's a wider range of people that you're kind of talking to, and to be able to build and actually have a true impact on the everyday of what we do was something that I was looking forward to. And it is something that I am rewarded with every day, because every day brings a new opportunity to do something.
Can you go into the core principles of the Sports Business Journal? Because on a previous episode, I was talking to Brett McCormick. Obviously, that's the man who connected us, and he was talking about how he has this unique beat that he doesn't see as typical in any way, shape, or form, where he's covering, well, it's in the name, the business side of sports, and that's not typically what people are going to look for.
Yeah, so with that, so we don't cover who won and who lost on the field, on the court, on the diamond, on the ice, whatever sport you're playing.
Right.
We cover who won in the boardroom, who won in the C-suite. Like we're covering people that are shaping the business side of it. And it's not just like, what agent signed the most clients at the NFL draft. It's not that. It's, Brett's beat is a perfect one, where he's covering facilities. It's like, there are other publications out there that are, talking about facilities. But the cool thing about SBJ is that we're able to kind of really get in there and kind of make people understand why this is important. It's also, so our NFL writer, he doesn't, talk about like who's going to go number one in the NFL draft. I mean, he might, just because he's a fan of the sport, but it really kind of goes into, okay, so what did the NFL do to make sure that their Las Vegas NFL draft was going to be the best draft of all time? And really kind of talking to the insiders, whether it's, at Vegas, in the NFL league offices, team officials, and really kind of drilling down into, what we can expect at this year's draft. And also, what will this year's draft mean for the business of the NFL? Like, how does it fit in? And so it really kind of is one of those things where it gives you a different way of kind of thinking about the industry. And that is one of the things that we have really taken a hold of. And, it's funny, you talked about ESPN being the worldwide leader. Well, I feel like everywhere I've been, it's the leader of whatever we're covering, And so, now that I'm at Sports Business Journal, I definitely know that we're the leader in covering the sports business.
What did it mean for you to be working at ESPN and helping sort of the next generation of broadcasters get their foot in the door working with ESPN Campus Connections?
So, it's funny. Obviously, I think back on that time fondly, but it's one of those things where every time I talk to a student, it always reinforced my appreciation for being able to work at ESPN. And so like, a lot of people that probably worked at ESPN as long as I did, they probably were like, at some point in their careers at ESPN, they saw it as just a job.
Yeah.
But by being able to work with college students, and they talked about like how it was always their dream to work at ESPN and just how cool it is to work at ESPN. Like, how could you not have an appreciation for being at ESPN? And how could I not have that appreciation? And then to kind of see, like, once they actually did something that made its way onto the air at ESPN, or if they were able to be a part of a broadcast that ESPN was putting on, just to kind of see through their eyes just how eye-opening, just how rewarding, just how exciting it is to do that. It'd be pretty cold-hearted to not be like, not be a part of that appreciation and a part of that excitement of like, oh yeah, I do work at ESPN. This is the best place to work. And to be able to, always revisit like the first time I walked through the doors at ESPN, because I'm talking to a student who's engaging with ESPN in that way for the first time. Just kind of relive that first day or that first year, or, the first time I found out that, hey, you're going to the Super Bowl, or, hey, we won an Emmy and you get one, so, it's just kind of one of those things where you always kind of had that appreciation for what they were engaged in, but also I also had that appreciation of what I got to do. I got to be a gatekeeper in a sense of, hey, we're a great company. You want to contribute to this great company. Now you are. So to be a part of that is really special.
You played football at Hampton University, right?
I did.
And you also got your BA in mass communications. So what was the balance of being a student athlete and getting your degree like?
Well, I will say one of the great things about being at Hampton, but also, my head coach, Joe Taylor, is that it's education first. Mm-hmm. It's like, yes, I was on the football team, but, I don't think I had a teammate, and I could be wrong, and just, revisionist history, so forgive me on that. I don't remember a teammate that had the dumb jock stereotype, because, like with football, it's like, yeah, it looks like it's just two people or people running into each other, right, trying to push them in one direction or the other. But the intelligence that it takes to be good at it and win takes a lot. And those skills translated into the classroom for a lot of my teammates. And so specifically with Coach Taylor, he was like, look, obviously there's a minimum GPA to play just in general, but he was like, look, if you're going to be an idiot, you can't be on this team. And so that wasn't just in the classroom either. It's like, if you were doing dumb stuff off the field, then there's no place for you in the program. Similarly, if you're not holding up your end in the classroom, there's no place for you here. And so it really kind of helped harden, solidify that, you're a student first. I mean, student comes before athlete for a reason. And so, it's also just, one of those things where, sorry, it's reflective, but, just kind of, some of the most intellectual conversations I had were with other teammates, just in the locker room. And it wasn't anything like we were talking about, like, hey, what's the square root of pi or anything like that, right? But it was just kind of like the intelligent conversations you would have. Again, going back to the earlier point of like just giving you a different perspective on how to think about things. I still use to this day, and I know that they do as well. Because it's funny, every time we just have like a random text exchange, or we actually talk on the phone, it's just like going back, I'm not going to say how long it goes because that makes me feel old, but going back to 96, 97, 98, or 99, it takes us right back, like we are side by side.
And as a graduate of Hampton University, what has it meant for you to see the emphasis HBCUs have gotten in sports recently, where all the coverage Jackson State's getting because of Deion Sanders, the NBA hosting the HBCU game at All-Star Weekend, and Chris Paul making it his mission to advertise HBCUs, J.R. Smith and what he's doing now. He just got awarded as it was some sort of academic award for having a 4.0 GPA while being on the golf team, to go back to what we were just talking about, how there's no place for non-academics in sports. What did it mean for you to see that emphasis in this new age?
Well, it's good, and I like how you said emphasis, because like when all this talk first started to come out of like, hey, we need to do more with HBCUs, it seemed like it was just kind of like a fad or something to do, but like it's extended past that, and people actually see the importance of HBCUs. It's just like any other school where like every school is kind of different, but there's that special community of like all the HBCUs and what it took for them to be founded and what it takes to keep them around, that, there's that kind of common spirit. Now, we're all competitive, so it's not like we're going to necessarily like say, oh, yeah, that school's, on par with my school, but that's just a competitive thing. But just to kind of showcase that, all the great things that these great universities are doing is very special, and it's heartening to kind of see people kind of rally behind it. I think we're past the fad phase of this, and hopefully it's more of like, no, this is just what we do. It's not necessarily like, oh, this is the trend to do. It's like, no, this is a legit and special university, and we should definitely make sure that this university continues to do great things.
I'm transferring to Winthrop University this fall, and one of the things I'm excited to do once I get there and become an upperclassman is to work for the Johnsonian, their student news publication. So I wanted to ask you, at Hampton University, was there anything unique about your experience in the mass comm department that made it special that you can remember?
Yeah, I mean, I was able to do play-by-play for 2 years for the basketball team, so it's awesome. It was definitely kind of one of those things where, maybe being on the football team was beneficial to help me get that role, but it wasn't something that kept me there. I like to think it was my talent. And one of the other kind of fun things about like doing the play-by-play is that one of the people that also did it, she is now the president of MSNBC. And
wow.
So it's just kind of funny to kind of, see her kind of do things that, you probably knew she was capable of, but to actually see it, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. But, it's one of those things that I would always tell the students that I worked with Campus Connection, was that you never know what the person beside you or in this room is capable of. So, never burn a bridge, but always, make sure that you're in a place where you make an impression, so that if you get the opportunity or they get the opportunity, that maybe you can put them on or they can put you on. So, it's one of those things. And plus the other thing, like Hampton now, they have a brand new building. I think it opened 2 years after I graduated. So, so what their journalism program is now is exponentially better than what mine was, because now they have more toys and, more, I think the staff is bigger too. But I would not trade my experience for the newer toys, because what we had is what we had. And so you had to make it work with what it was. And so, having that resourcefulness developed when I was in school still helps me to this day, where it's like, okay, I might not have access to this equipment. How am I going to make this work? And you just figure it out. And, and that also goes back to, the student body and the fellow classmates that I had, of like, being able to bounce ideas off and like, hey, I got this idea, and here's what I'm thinking. Like, oh no, well, what if you did this? Or yes, do that, but do more of this. And so, you kind of, hopefully for you, as you kind of get into Winthrop and, you find these opportunities, that you get a similar experience to that. Because, it's kind of second nature at this point, where it's like, oh yeah, I remember doing this in college, or something similar to this in college, or being in a similar situation in college or early in my career. And, I was, I got through that, so I can definitely do this, because I'm already ahead of where I would have been at that point.
Was ESPN your first job out of college? And if so, can you take me through what getting that job was like, and what your first time on the campus in Bristol was like, all the things of that nature?
Yeah, it was my first job out of college. And it was pretty cool, because so we had a symposium at Hampton for mass media students, where companies would just come in and tell us, like, what their company's up to. And so ESPN was there, and I was the moderator for the ESPN panel. You know, my professor asked me if I wanted to do it, and I'm like, of course I do. So one of the cool things was I got to chat with the moderator before it started, because I was going to have to introduce him, a guy named Al Jaffe. And, you know, so we're just talking, and I'm just kind of, okay, because this is 99. No, this is 2000. So the internet wasn't what it is today, so I couldn't necessarily just Google this guy. All right, so I had to kind of pick his brain and like, hey, so, you know, where are you from? What do you do? You know, all that. And so we ended up just having a conversation. Like, it didn't even feel like I was really getting information from him. And, you know, so he does the panel, you know, we thank him for his time. And then, you know, once it's over, I'm just sitting there. I'm like, going to thank him for coming to our school and, you know, for talking to all of us. And he goes, what are you doing after college? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, do you have a job lined up? I was like, oh, working for you? Kind of jokingly. He's like, no, seriously. Do you want to come up for an interview? I'm like, sure. So go up to the interview, and I'm thinking, and he was like, oh, when you get up there, just ask for this person. I'm like, okay, this seems pretty informal, but all right, here we go. He's like, get up there and ask for this person. So I go up there, I ask for her, and she goes, oh, he'll be right in. I'm like, what do you mean he'll be right in? I was interviewing with Al. So when I did the interview, it just was an extension from the conversation that we had a month prior. You know, now there was an interview process, like the interview process at that time, it was a sports quiz. Yeah. You know, and so my advice is, he was like, oh, all you have to do is read, you know, the USA Today and some other sports sections a week before you come. Just read them every day. I'm like, all right, cool. But in my mind, I'm like, all right, I know sports, I'll be all right. So we get up there, and so we just kind of talking. He's like, okay, so we need to actually do the interview. I'm like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So then it was things like and I told him, I was like, I'm from Virginia, so I root for all the DC teams, and I guess I kind of keep an eye on the Orioles at the time because there was no Nationals. And he's like, all right, cool. I want to ask you any questions about them. So he goes, okay, so who are some of the Chicago White Sox top players, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of the team? So, you know, kind of, you know, finesse my way through that answer. And I'm just like, man, this is what this is going to be? All right. I don't know if I'm going to get this job. And so, you know, he asked me a couple other questions, and then he's like, who are your top 5 candidates for the Vezina Trophy? And I thought about it for a second. I was like, all right, well, can you make a deal with me? You tell me what the Vezina Trophy is for. I'll give you an answer. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, cool. He's like, it's for the top goaltender in the NHL. I'm like, oh, cool. I knew 5 goalies. Right. So those are my top 5 candidates. Right. But I think that's the answer that got me the job. But it wasn't what I said. It wasn't the answer I gave. It was I was willing to say, I don't know, but with more information, I'll give you an answer.
Yeah.
So, you know, it happened to be the last question, so that probably also helped. But I think that was kind of a thing where, you know, at ESPN, they were like, look, you know, we'll teach you how to do the job. Right. But, you know, they want to know that you're easy to work with. They want to know that you're not a know-it-all, you know? And so to this day, I think that's the answer that got me the job. But then, so at the time, and the program's kind of changed a little bit, but they had a program where you were a temporary production assistant, and you had 8 months to prove yourself. Right. Mm-hmm. And then there was a committee of like coordinating producers and senior coordinating producers and some other people that they'd vote on you. Yeah. And so, you know, I got there I got there in July, and by late September, I was doing NFL Tonight. So, you know, there may have been, but people couldn't remember, but there never been what we call a temp PA doing any type of specialty show on a regular basis. And so, yeah, I felt pretty good about, you know, how that was going to go. But the first Super Bowl I went to was actually that year. It was the Ravens and Giants in Tampa. And in January, my boss was like, hey, you know, call travel. You need to book your travel for the Super Bowl. I was like, I'm going? You're like, yeah. So it happened to be that the Super Bowl was actually the week of when my vote was supposed to be. So I was either like, this is a really good parting gift, or I should feel pretty confident about getting full-time employment here at ESPN. And obviously it was a forebearer of, hey, you're going to be full-time, and then kind of ran from there.
So after that 8-month trial period, essentially, was that when you felt like you were established to the point where from now on, no matter what happens in my career, I'm confident that with the skills I've built up and the information that I know, I can get a job anywhere?
I'm pretty confident anyway. Yes, I guess it kind of more solidified that yes, I'm on the right path, more than giving me confidence that I could, get a job. But ESPN's where I wanted to work. So once you kind of got through that, I'm like, oh well, great. This is where I'm going to work forever. But so another opportunity came up where I could work closer to home, so I left the company. But kind of did that for 3 years, and I was like, this opportunity overseeing Campus Connection, that seems pretty interesting. And I had visited Charlotte growing up, and I was like, man, if I could ever move and live in Charlotte, then that's what I'll do. And so I was fortunate enough to do that.
Thanks for joining, Acie. I think that's all for episode 9 of Media Conversations with Malik Cooper. For more content from me, you can follow my Instagram at Malik Cooper Media or my Twitter at Malik_Cooper. Are there any final thoughts you want to leave our audience with before we go?
No, I just got to say, as episode number 9, I hope to be back for episode 34, since those are the jerseys behind you. But thanks for having me.
Ooh, wow. Paul Pierce's jersey, though. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. I'll keep that in mind for the future. I'll keep that in mind. Yeah, no problem. You were a great interview. Thank you all for listening to episode 9. I'll be back with episode 10 on May 30th, and I'll see you then.